Elle's Forbidden Mate, a werewolf shifter romance written by D. Devine. Part 2. It had been exactly 1 year since Soraya left, and Kaeren was starting to feel uneasy. Over the past year, his pack had settled into a rhythm, but deep inside he knew something was missing. He wouldn't feel complete unless Soraya was right there beside him. "Kaeren, you're lost in thought again," Thorn said, nudging Kaeren with his shoulder. "Sorry," Kaeren muttered before exhaling heavily. "I think it's time I tell you all what's really been on my mind." His heart ached as he noticed the concern spreading across his packmates' faces. Lyric, Darian, Thorn and Isolde sat silently, waiting for him to explain his strange behavior. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, Kaeren ran a hand through his hair, trying to shake off the tension. "Do you all remember the hunter who showed up here a year ago?" he asked, watching as recognition flickered in Darian's eyes. "Yeah. Her name was Soraya, right?" Darian replied, noticing the distant look in his alpha's gaze. "She's my mate," Kaeren admitted, his voice soft. "She promised to return in a year, but she hasn't come back yet, and I'm starting to worry." He let out a small chuckle at the shocked expressions staring back at him. "A alpha female is a hunter," Thorn blurted out in disbelief. He tilted his head slightly while tightening his arms around Isolde, who was sitting on his lap. "Yes, she is," Kaeren confirmed. "I want to ask all of you, will you come with me to the Slayer Council to bring her back?" His tone was sincere, leaving them room to refuse if they wanted to. "I'm in," Darian said firmly, standing up. Not many wolves would ever accept a vampire into their pack, but Kaeren had, and Darian wanted to repay that kindness. "I'll come too," Thorn added without hesitation. Kaeren had done so much for him. This was the least he could do. "I'm going as well," Lyria declared, recalling how Kaeren had saved her in the woods and given her a place in the pack, treating her with respect despite being a female. "I'll go with you," Isolde chimed in. She knew their alpha would be even stronger with his mate beside him. Kaeren felt overwhelmed. He loved his pack with all his heart, and though they didn't have to do this, they were willing to stand by him. Tears stung the corners of his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. "Then let's go bring back our alpha female," he declared, standing up and stretching his hand forward. Darian, Lyric, Thorn and Isolde placed their hands over his, and together they threw them into the air. It was time to bring Soraya home. Kaeren only hoped they weren't too late, but shaking his head, he pushed the doubt away. He would hold on to hope until he saw her with his own eyes. Wanting to see what would happen next? Why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. They had been tracking Soraya for 2 days. Her scent was still clear in Kaeren's mind, but after a year it had faded. Whenever the trail became too weak, he had to rely on the instincts of his inner beast to sense the direction she had gone. To make things easier for Darian, they had taken a wagon pulled by 2 horses. It was stocked with supplies they would need along the way. Darian drove the wagon, with Lyric sitting beside him. Kaeren led the way in his wolf form, while Thorn and Isolde rode in the back. His pack gave him space, knowing he was growing more restless with each passing hour. Kaeren never expected having a mate, but being apart from her was unbearable. The ache in his chest made him quick to anger, and he knew that soon he wouldn't be fit to lead. He needed his alpha female beside him. Without her, he wasn't whole. Shaking off the heavy thoughts, Kaeren kept moving, his paws pressing into the dirt. Nose to the ground, he focused on leading his pack forward. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, he knew they had to stop for the night. Spotting a small clearing with a Maraselwing stream, Kaeren let out a low chuckle at the sound of relieved sighs from his packmates. "I'm going hunting. Can you all set up camp?" Kaeren spoke through the mind link Darian had been keeping open. "I will go with you," Darian replied, hopping down from the wagon and stretching his legs. "We'll take care of the camp," Lyrish assured him, while Isolde and Thorn started unpacking supplies from the back. "Thank you. Hopefully we'll bring back something worth eating," Kaeren rumbled before trotting off, Darian trailing behind. Kaelen let out a huff as Darian leaped into a tree and vanished, seeking animals to drain for fresh blood. The mind link snapped as he disappeared. Shaking his head, Kaelen continued into the unfamiliar forest, letting his senses take control. The earthy mix of trees, grass, and water filled the air, mingling with the scents of countless creatures. Trails crisscrossed in well-worn paths, marked by the predators that hunted them. But none of them would be foolish enough to challenge a werewolf, a superior predator with both the power of a wolf and the intelligence of a man. Ignoring everything but the scent of a large elk, Kaelen pressed his nose to the ground and followed its trail. He made sure to stay downwind, just as Raziel had taught him. Stopping just 3 feet from the grazing animal, Kaelen tensed, his muscles coiling in anticipation. With a low snarl, he lunged, landing on the elk's back. The creature let out a terrified scream, the sound vibrating through Kaelen like a song. These moments reminded him why he embraced what he had become. He had once been a helpless boy, chained and tormented, first by his father, then by the werewolf who turned him Fergus. That boy had been weak. But this was power. Even the frustration of being apart from his mate faded, just for a moment. But his thoughts distracted him, and the elk's antlers caught him on the side of the head. A deep growl rumbled in Kaelen's chest as his claws dug into the beast's sides, spurred by the rush of the hunt. With a final snap of his jaws, he clamped down on its throat and ripped away at the vulnerable flesh. The elk collapsed beneath him, its final breath leaving in a sputter of blood, staining Kaelen's muzzle and chest. Lifting the heavy carcass in his jaws, Kaelen turned and followed his own trail back to camp. When he arrived, he dropped the elk next to 3 rabbits, Darian's catch, mostly drained of blood. Lyric handed him a change of clothes, and Kaelen shifted back into his human form, groaning as exhaustion hit him like a heavy weight. As he dressed, he watched Thorn and Isolde work in perfect sync, expertly carving up the kills. They tossed the organs into a pot for stew, set the elk to roast over the fire, and began curing the rabbit meat for jerky. "You get enough blood?" Kaelen asked as he sat down beside Darian, the smell of the cooking meat making his stomach rumble. "It'll last for a while," Darian murmured, his sharp fangs glinting in the firelight, a reminder of how deadly he was. "That's good," Kaelen nodded. He knew Darian could eat regular food, but he needed fresh blood at least 3 times a week to keep his vampire instincts under control and to heal from serious wounds. "You should rest in the wagon tomorrow," Lyric said firmly. "Let Isolde and Thorn take the lead. You've been awake for 2 days straight. You need sleep." Kaelen yawned, blinking as tears pricked the corners of his eyes. "But—" "No buts," Lyrin interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You're our alpha, but I won't stand by and watch you wear yourself down before we even get to the real fight." Her voice was gentle, full of the warmth and care of a sister. Kaelen let out a reluctant sigh. "Fine, but wake me if anything happens." The conversation faded into a comfortable silence as Thorn and Isolde passed out food, then took their own portions. Kaelen felt at peace with his pack, but he knew something was missing. The warmth of companionship couldn't fill the void Soraya left. He ate without tasting the food, his mind drifting. Was she still alive? If so, was she imprisoned? The thought soured his appetite. His wolf reminded him that he was no longer weak, no longer a prisoner, but the worry still gnawed at him. With a weary smile, Kaelen climbed into his tent after bidding his pack good night. Their concerned gazes tugged at his heart. But he wouldn't feel whole again until she was in his arms. As he lay down on the cot, exhaustion finally won over his restless mind. Shifting and hunting had taken its toll, and he had barely slept since they left. But Liek was right. He needed his strength. His last thought before sleep took him. was the image of his mate, his alpha female. Wanting to see what would happen next? Why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 3. Thorn hummed quietly, pulling Isolde closer as she rested peacefully on his chest. He recalled Darian's words from the night before. Today, he and Isolde would take the lead while Kaeren caught up on sleep. Their alpha needed to recover his strength before they reached the council. There was no doubt they would have to battle their way through to reclaim their alpha female. His thoughts drifted away when he felt Isolde stir against him. As his small mate stretched and blinked her eyes open, Thorn's heart clenched at the sight. Her bright green eyes settled on him, golden curls falling messily around her face. His wolf rumbled with happiness. She was perfect. She saw beyond his past and loved him completely. He wanted to love her for the rest of their lives. "Good morning, beautiful," Thorn murmured, smirking as a deep blush spread across her cheeks. "Good morning," Isolde whispered, trying to slow her racing heart. His deep, husky morning voice always had an effect on her. Thorn gently cupped her face and placed a kiss on her forehead, chuckling when she playfully punched him in the stomach. He groaned, pretending to be winded, only for Isolde to press her lips against his in response. "Now that is a proper morning kiss," Isolde huffed, pulling away with a pout. I'm sorry, Thorn laughed. "But you're too adorable when I tease you." He was about to continue teasing her when the scent of cooked meat and rice filled the air. His wolf perked up immediately, and, as if on cue, both his and Isolde's stomachs grumbled. Having a fast metabolism as a werewolf wasn't always a blessing. "Should we go join them?" Isolde asked, licking her lips as the scent of spices grew stronger.
"Of course, love." Thorn grinned, climbing out of the tent first. He turned back and offered his hand to help her up. His heart swelled when she placed her hand in his, steadying herself. Once outside, Thorn pulled her into his embrace, wrapping his arms around her waist. Isolde giggled, the sound like music to his ears. Sir. He loved her with everything he had. "Morning, lovebirds," Darian called from behind them, grinning as he interrupted their moment. "Ooh, behave," Lyric scolded, smacking Darian over the head with a wooden spoon before returning to her cooking. "Is Kaelen doing okay?" Thorn asked, as he and Isolde took a seat by the fire, across from Darian and Lyric. "For now. We made him breakfast earlier. After eating and packing up his tent, he climbed into the back of the wagon and told us to let him sleep for a few more hours while we travel. Darian explained, glancing around the camp. Only Thorn and Isolde's tent remained standing. "Speaking of tents, once you take yours down, you can eat. Then we need to get moving before we waste more daylight," Lyric said, gesturing toward them. With a nod, Thorn set to work, folding their blankets and furs before taking down the tent. He packed everything into the wagon, careful not to disturb Kaelen. Even in his sleep, their alpha looked troubled. Thorn couldn't begin to imagine the pain of knowing you had a mate but being unable to claim her. A whole year of waiting, of longing, it made Thorn's wolf respect Kaelen even more. Their alpha had suffered enough. He deserved the peace that only a mate could bring. Once everything was packed, Thorn sat beside Isolde, pulling her onto his lap. He needed to ground himself, to remind himself that this was real. He was free. And yet, his mind still liked to drag him back to the past, reminding him of the pain he had endured. Sensing his unease, Isolde leaned into him, pressing her body against his. The memories flickered behind his eyes, but her warmth kept him present. He sighed in relief, offering her a grateful smile before capturing her lips in a deep, lingering kiss. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence, then washed their dishes in the stream and extinguished the fire. As they prepared to leave, Thorn and Isolde left their clothes in the wagon and shifted into their wolf forms, letting Darian and Lyric take the wagon seats. The horses remained calm, used to their shifting after so much time together at the cabin. Thorn knew Lyric would have fed and watered them before departure. Following the trail Kaeren had pointed out, Thorn set the pace, Isolde at his side. Every so often, his gray fur brushed against her white fur as they moved in sync. The trail was faint, the scent nearly gone. Kaeren was the only one who could track it properly. His connection to Soraya ran far deeper. Hours passed as they traveled beneath the thick canopy, the heat of the sun barely touching them. The wagon and horses moved steadily behind them, handling the forest terrain with ease. Thorn could only hope they were still on the right path to finding their alpha female. Everyone seemed to know her. Everyone seemed to know them. And Thorn was ready to ride her up, and just as doubt crept into his mind, a strange scent hit his nose. It smelled like an oncoming storm, but it was thick with the metallic tang of blood, tainted with magic. Lifting his head, Thorn scanned the sky. It was clear everywhere except for one area where dark clouds swirled in a violent vortex. Darian, wait, Kaeren, something is wrong. Then follow me, Thorn ordered through the mind link Darian had been keeping open. Understood. Be careful, Darian responded as he slowed the horses to a stop. Confident that Darian would do as instructed, Thorn bolted into the trees, heading toward the unnatural storm. He heard Isolde following, and his wolf bristled. Something about this magic felt dangerous, but he knew better than to stop his mate from doing what she wanted. As they neared, the air crackled with energy, forming an invisible barrier around the storm's center. Shaking his fur, Thorn pushed through. Rain lashed against his coat, stinging like tiny whips. It hurt less in wolf form, but he knew it would have been brutal in his human body. He pressed forward, ignoring the warnings of the magic trying to keep him out. With a final push, he broke through, yelping as the end of his tail was singed. He heard Isolde's worried bark from the other side, but he growled back, warning her to stay put. The magic was unstable. Turning his focus ahead, Thorn's eyes widened. A woman lay at the storm's center. She was badly wounded, her breathing ragged. Stepping closer, he took in her appearance. Fear rippled through him. She was a witch. The tattoo of her coven had been burned into a deep wound on her arm. Her hair, stark white, confirmed it. A weather witch? One who could manipulate the elements with ease. Beyond the tattoo's searing scorch marks covered her body, her clothing was tattered and her bare feet were raw and bleeding as if she had run through the forest without shoes. What are you waiting for? She rasped, her voice weak. You broke through the barrier because you want to drink witch blood, right? She coughed, blood sizzling with residual magic as it hit the ground. I'm not here to hurt you, Thorn said, shifting to his human form and raising his hands in surrender. I want to help. Oh. I tried so hard. I bet. Sure. Because my name is Thorn. My pack and I are heading to the council to rescue our alpha female. She's a slayer. One of my pack brothers is a vampire, but he's also a doctor. We can help you. What's your name? The woman hesitated before murmuring, You can call me June. Then she slipped into unconsciousness. As soon as she passed out, the storm dissipated. The sky returned to its normal blue. Thorn turned to find his pack gathering around him, their worried eyes scanning him for injuries before landing on the witch. Kaeren gave a thoughtful hum before nodding at Darian. Without hesitation, the vampire ran back to the wagon to grab his medical supplies. Whatever had happened to this young witch, Thorn wasn't sure. Shifting back into his wolf form, he returned to Isolde's side. She smacked his nose in frustration, scolding him for worrying her. It was worth it if they could save someone. Whining an apology, Thorn licked under her chin. She nuzzled into him, accepting it. His tail wagged as he pressed into her, inhaling her scent. What's her name? Darian asked upon returning with his medical kit. June, Thorne responded, through the mind link. Darian nodded. Maybe she would survive. If anyone could save her, it was Darian. Wanting to see what would happen next, why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you.
Chapter 4. Soraya stretched, her muscles aching in protest. She was nearing the end of her 3-week imprisonment under the council's rule, and her trial could happen any day now. Letting out an irritated sigh, she barely flinched as a guard dragged his spear across the bars of her cage, the harsh screech of metal against metal ringing through the air. In the dimly lit prison, Soraya could make out the silhouettes of men and women, all slumped in defeat, awaiting their inevitable execution at the hands of the council. Until she met Kaeren, she had never questioned her missions. But now, following orders blindly felt meaningless. How many innocent supernatural beings had been locked away with the guilty? She had ignored her own instincts too many times, capturing creatures she knew hadn't committed the crimes they were accused of. Why had she been born into a life of servitude? There was no chain around her neck, yet the identification tag on her ear was proof enough. She was not her own. The council owned every slayer, and she knew she would never truly be free. She would never get the chance to live alongside Kaeren and his pack of misfits. Even so, deep in her heart, she clung to the hope that he was coming for her. "Look how low you've fallen, Soraya," a woman's voice called from the shadows as footsteps approached her cage. A sneer curled on Soraya's lips as she recognized Bethany, the second oldest slayer under the council's command. The raven-haired woman had taken over training the girls the same day Soraya was granted her meeting with the council. She had despised Soraya from the very beginning, always believing herself to be superior. "I see no shame in following my own heart for the first time in nearly 3 centuries, Soraya stated, her gaze hardening into a glare. "Falling in love is treason, and you know it," Bethany snapped, slamming her fist against the iron bars. "I'm shocked you even managed to escape the breeding program." Soraya shuddered at the mention of the vile program. It was a twisted system set up by the council to ensure a constant supply of slayers. After 100 years of service, every slayer was forced to bear children with council-approved men. Those children were taken at birth, raised by maids until they turned 10, then molded into ruthless killers. Stripped of emotion, trained to obey orders without question, which bred the same vibes, a continuity she knew, and then lay pen in After Dark. "And what about you? You've given birth to 3, maybe 5 children, condemning them to this life of blood, death, and servitude?" Soraya spat in disgust. "3 daughters who will grow into exceptional slayers," Bethany replied indifferently. "And 2 sons I couldn't care less about. They serve no purpose to the council." Soraya's hands curled into fists. "Your sons were likely abandoned or worse, killed. Don't you see how wrong this is?" she growled, kicking the bars of her cramped cage. A sharp jolt of pain shot through her body, but she didn't care. "It doesn't matter," Bethany huffed. "You'll be dead in 4 days anyway." She struck the bars one last time before striding away. As her footsteps faded, Soraya let out a low growl. The injustice of it all burned inside her. 4 days. The time would pass quickly. But she wouldn't go down without a fight. If she was going to die, she'd take as many councilmen with her as she could. Darian let out an annoyed hiss as he finished redressing the witch's wounds. He knew they were still a few days away from the council, and Kaeren was becoming more restless by the hour. Their alpha was eager for a fight, the bond with his mate making him more determined than ever. Darian sighed as he secured the last bandage. If the witch healed within the next 3 days, she might be strong enough to survive. Glancing around the camp, Darian could tell everyone was fast asleep. It was his turn to keep watch. No animal would dare approach a group of supernatural beings, but humans? Humans were fools. They had set up camp near a human settlement so Darian could stock up on medical supplies, but the townspeople had been wary of them. You think they're all asleep? A hushed male voice came from the darkness. Shut up, idiot. You'll wake them, another voice whispered harshly. Both of you quiet. Stealth, remember? A third, older voice snapped, irritation lacing his tone. Darien smirked, silently leaping into the trees. His fangs sharpened as his vampire instinct stirred. He hadn't fed in days. Humans always thought they were at the top of the food chain. It was laughable. Peering down, he spotted 3 men sneaking into the camp. The leader held a knife, while the 2 younger ones clutched black sacks, clearly intending to loot their supplies. Be careful with the horses, and don't wake anyone up. Take as much as you can carry, the leader instructed. Got it, boss, the younger men whispered. Before they could make a move, Darien spoke. I hate to break it to you, but I'm already awake. His voice carried through the darkness, laced with compulsion. And you won't be taking anything from us. If you want to keep breathing, I suggest you leave. Now. Who's there? One of the men whispered, gripping his weapon tighter. Turn around, and you'll never have to find out, Darien warned, his voice smooth and deadly. Stay, and I'll drain you dry. Their fear was intoxicating. Their screams rang beautifully in his ears as he landed before them, his once green eyes now glowing a menacing red. Run, Darien ordered, his voice calm yet terrifying. He could hear his pack stirring, ready to step in if needed. Vampire! One of the younger men shrieked before bolting toward town. The smartest of the 3. The others hesitated. Darien took a step forward. That was all it took. They turned and ran. Smirking, Darien gave chase. He weaved through the trees, effortlessly dodging fallen branches. The slowest man didn't stand a chance. Darien pounced, yanking the man's head back to expose his neck. He sank his fangs in, groaning as warm blood spilled over his tongue. His hunger took over, and he drank until the man lost consciousness. Dropping the limp body, Darien turned his sights to the second man. This one put up a fight, managing to stab Darien in the side before the vampire caught him by the throat. Darien snarled, draining him until his heartbeat slowed. Ripping the dagger from his side, he let the man collapse before sprinting after the last one. The final man had a head start, but it wasn't enough. Darien leapt, tackling him to the ground. The human kicked and punched, scrambling to escape, but it only made Darien hungrier. He sank his fangs in deep, drinking greedily. As the man's pulse weakened, Darien's senses snapped back. He forced himself to stop before he killed them. Retracing his steps, he carefully sealed the wounds his fangs had left. They would live. Barely. Arriving back at camp, he found Lyric in her wolf form, amusement twinkling in her golden eyes. Have fun? She asked, her tail flicking playfully as she padded up to him. She licked a streak of blood from his chin while Darien scratched behind her ears. I wasn't about to let them steal from us, or worse, try to harm anyone, Darien huffed. Lyric let out a huff of laughter. It was a good reminder. Humans weren't always the weak ones. Sometimes they were the prey. Wanting to see what would happen next? Why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 5. June could feel the steady motion of the wagon beneath her and the warmth of a body lying close beside her. She could also sense 4 others nearby. They were strong. She could tell as her magic reached out, brushing against her surroundings to help her get her bearings. 5 in total, 4 werewolves, 1 vampire. Her senses weren't as sharp as theirs, but when her eyes finally fluttered open, she realized their leader was sleeping separately, wrapped in a sleeping bag inside the wagon. Soft growls and whimpers escaped his lips now and then. Her magic crackled under her skin, instinctively wary of the alpha wolf, but her nerves settled when she noticed his breathing remained steady despite his visible distress. As she fully pulled her eyelids open, June sucked in a sharp breath as pain flared across her body. Her wounds were healing, but the ache lingered. She could feel tight bandages wrapped around her injuries and silently thanked whoever had tended to her wounds. "Glad to see you're finally awake," a warm female voice spoke. June tried to respond, but her throat felt rough and dry. "Here, darlin'," the voice said again, this time holding a water pouch in front of her. Reaching out, June grasped the container, uncapped it, and brought it to her lips. As the cool liquid slid down her throat, the raw scratchiness eased. "You've been drifting in and out of sleep for almost 3 weeks," another voice said, this one male, deep and calm, carrying the precise tone of someone accustomed to treating injuries. "We've been keeping you nourished with broth." The fog in June's mind finally lifted, making her fully aware of her surroundings. Her senses sharpened, and she sat up quickly, eyes scanning the group. Where are you going? And why is there an alpha wolf sleeping next to me?" she demanded, her voice more alert now. "Look who's full of questions," the man chuckled, only to get smacked on the head by the woman beside him. "Eyes him, sweetheart," the woman said with a grin. "I'm Lyric, and this fool here is Darien, my mate. The 2 wolves at the front of the wagon are Thorn and Isolde. We're heading to the Slayer Council to retrieve our alpha's mate. She's a Slayer. As for why he's sleeping beside you, well, he hasn't rested in 2 days, and we had to force him to get some sleep." "You're insane if you think the council will just hand over a Slayer," June scoffed, groaning as she adjusted into a sitting position. "Those women suffer more under the rule of those controlling old men than any of the prisoners do." Darian's expression darkened, and June noticed that the alpha wolf, Kaeren they had called him, had stirred slightly, though he remained asleep. "What do you mean the Slayers suffer the most?" Darian questioned, his tone sharper now. June hesitated for a moment, then exhaled. "I saw it once when I was young, when my mother turned in a traitor from our coven," she explained. "The Slayers are trained to be killers, and after 100 years of service, they're forced into a breeding program. Once their children are born, they're taken away. The girls are raised to be the next generation of Slayers. The boys, they're either abandoned or executed." Lyric let out a growl, her disgust palpable. The horses reared slightly, startled by the sudden aggression in her voice. "They treat them like cattle," she spat. "Thinks they treated my mate like a disposable tool," Kaelen growled from beside them. The sound sent a shiver through June as it vibrated through the morning air. The deep, guttural snarl was filled with barely restrained fury and raw pain. June instinctively shrank back, her gaze locking onto a pair of glowing golden eyes. This was an alpha, teetering on the edge of a rampage. "We're just a day away now," June said carefully, hoping to calm him. "If you're serious about fighting for your mate, then you should conserve your energy and prepare for battle." "Good," Kaelen rumbled, his voice more beast than man. "Her masters will die by my claws and fangs, and she will be free." Before anyone could respond, Kaelen slipped back into unconsciousness, his body exhausted. June let out a slow breath of relief. "Thank you," Darian muttered, rubbing his temples. "I didn't want to use compulsion on him again." "You're welcome," June replied sincerely. "I owe you all my life. I'll help you get back this alpha's mate. He needs her. To keep himself from losing control, especially since he wasn't born a wolf." "Thank you, June," Lyric said, though she hesitated. "But you realize we'll be fighting the entire council for one Slayer. The battle will be brutal." June simply nodded, a small smirk playing at her lip. She would love to help bring down the council. "Time with you," the witch declared, her eyes swirling with an inner storm. Lyric sighed and turned her gaze forward, watching the horses as their heads bobbed with the rhythm of their hooves. Just ahead of them, Thorn and Isolde ran in their wolf forms, one grey, one white, moving swiftly, following the directions Kaelen had given before falling asleep. Lyric's heart ached for him, Kaeren had helped all of them in one way or another. Now it was their turn to be there for him. Her chest tightened painfully as she imagined what it would be like to know your mate existed but be unable to reach them. "We'll reach our destination tonight," Darian murmured, his sharp fang peeking over his lower lip in a way Lyric found oddly endearing. "We'll stop a few miles away and set up camp, then finalize our plan in the morning." Smiling softly, Lyric nestled closer to her mate, inhaling his familiar scent and sighing contentedly as he pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "We'll get through this," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "We'll bring Soraya home and return to our territory." A quiet whine slipped from her lips at the thought of their cabin. Of safety, of normalcy. "Of course we will," Darian reassured her. His confidence settled something in her chest. They would succeed, they had to. Wanting to see what would happen next? Why not subscribe to this channel to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 6. Kaeren paced back and forth, his instincts spiraling out of control. He could smell her. Soraya, his mate. The scent was faint, buried beneath the layers of other smells that clung to the council's fortress, but it was there. His wolf clawed at the inside of his skin, demanding freedom. He had waited long enough. If he had to leave behind a trail of bodies to reach her, then so be it. The anger June had stirred in him when she spoke of the council's treatment of slayers burned like liquid fire in his veins. "Kaeren." The sound of Darian's voice snapped him from his thoughts as the vampire appeared in front of him. "What?" Kaeren barked, his words sharper than intended. "We need a strategy. If we charge in without one, we'll be cut down before we even reach the gates," Darian said evenly, keeping his gaze lowered so the dominant wolf in Kaeren wouldn't feel challenged. "Oh, I know," Kaeren growled before forcing himself to sit down near the fire. "It's just, she's so close." "I get it," Darian responded, his voice calm, understanding. "To get inside, we'll need to take out the outer guards first," June interjected, stepping forward. "Then I suggest we release the prisoners. It'll cause enough chaos to cover us. Some of them will be more than willing to fight alongside us." "How do we even get close to the fortress?" Thorn asked from across the fire, looking directly at the witch. "And how do we get the keys?" "I can conceal us in a storm as we approach," June explained, holding out her palm, where a miniature tornado began to spin. "We'll need to take the guards down fast and efficiently. The ones holding the keys will likely be stationed closest to the prisons." "You seem to know a lot about breaking into jails," Isolde chuckled, though unease laced her voice. "I have my own past, little wolf," June murmured, her laugh empty, devoid of warmth. "I've lived through many lifetimes." Kaeren was the first to shake off the chill of her words. "Regardless, I'm grateful you're risking so much to help me get my mate back." "Don't mention it, young Alpha," June replied, her voice steady with determination. "I owe you a life debt, and I intend to repay it in full." "Then this is our plan," Kaeren declared, standing tall as he faced the council's fortress. "Blood will spill today, but none of it will be ours."
"Yes, Alpha," his packmates responded in unison, their voices giving him the strength to carry this through. They moved under the cover of a raging storm, walking unseen within the chaos June had summoned. As they neared the fortress, Kaelen spotted guards struggling against the violent winds, trying to regain control. Before they could call for reinforcements, June struck them down with deadly bolts of lightning. Kaelen and his pack handled the others, eliminating them swiftly before they could alert anyone inside. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air, and once all that remained of the guards were charred corpses, June let the storm dissipate. "I sense 2 prison wings," she said, pointing in opposite directions. Kaelen inhaled deeply, filtering through the smells. Soraya's scent was coming from the right. Darian, Lyric, come with me, Kaelen ordered. The rest of you go left, free the prisoners, tell them this is an uprising. With that, they split into two teams, moving like shadows through the fortress. They took out guards one by one, their movements quick and deadly. Kaelen snapped necks effortlessly, finding the lack of resistance almost disappointing. When they reached the prison, the stench hit him like a fist. The scent of suffering, blood, urine, and filth was thick in the air. He shoved down the memories of his own imprisonment and pushed forward, kicking the door open. His eyes adjusted to the dim light, revealing rows of cages filled with captives. Oh, no, it's better. So delicious. I I don't get it. Um, it actually, I am Kaelen, he growled, sidestepping the blade. I came for my mate. Before the guard could react, Kaelen lunged, knocking the weapon from his grasp. Wrapping his arm around the man's neck, he twisted sharply. The crack echoed through the dungeon as the guard collapsed lifelessly to the Mari Celor. A deafening roar of cheers erupted from the prisoners. Kaelen ripped the keys from the fallen guard's belt and tossed them to Darian before grabbing the discarded sword. Prisoners! He bellowed. I am searching for a slayer. She has red hair. Her scent lingers here. Where is she? Silence fell. Then a voice, low and weak, called from the shadows. Amy took her. For trial. Kaelin's grip on the sword tightened. Thank you, he said. For that, you will all be freed. His voice rang with authority. Tonight, the Slayer Council falls. Who among you will fight? A roar of approval filled the chamber, bodies shifting in the darkness as they prepared for battle. Lyric stepped forward, her voice commanding. Listen well, we're setting you free, but the Slayer currently on trial is not your enemy. She is our alpha female. You want revenge? Take it. Spill their blood. But do not touch her. Ugh! Darian and Lyric moved quickly, unlocking cages and handing weapons to those strong enough to fight. Let's go, Darian said once the last prisoner was freed. A thick wave of bloodlust filled the air as prisoners armed themselves. Some shifted into their true forms, claws and fangs, ready for battle. Kaelen led them through the fortress, meeting up with Thorn, Isolde, and June. Their army had doubled in size, but Kaelen had only one goal, Soraya. Her scent was stronger now, pulling him forward like an invisible thread. He barely registered the guards in his path, cutting them down without thought. The council chamber was just ahead, and then a voice, pause, yelling. Kaelen didn't think. He ran, wanting to see what would happen next. Why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you.
Chapter 7. A little before Kaelen and the pack stormed the council fortress. Soraya's eyes fluttered open at the sound of keys jingling above her. Her body ached, but she forced herself to focus. There were 6 guards surrounding her cell, and she could sense more stationed throughout the room. It was overkill, but she understood why. They knew that if only 2 guards were here, she could easily overpower them. Get up, prisoner. It's time for your trial, Bethany sneered, yanking open the cell door and dragging Soraya to her feet. The sudden movement made Soraya's muscles scream in protest, but she clenched her teeth, refusing to show weakness. Oh, joy! But don't you mean execution? Soraya chuckled, the sound hollow, broken. Several guards shifted uncomfortably, uneasy in the presence of a former slayer. Ginvalva! Another slayer snapped, yanking hard on the chains around Soraya's wrists. The rough tug made her wince, but she met the woman's glare with an unyielding one of her own. They wasted no more time talking, dragging Soraya forward, pushing and shoving her between them. Weapons remained drawn, aimed at her in case she attempted to resist. Soraya simply grit her teeth and walked with them. It felt good to move again after weeks of being locked in a cage too small for her body. As they marched through the council's corridors, Soraya noted how ridiculous their formation was. A large procession of guards surrounding a single prisoner. It left much of the compound exposed. Rookie mistake. Then again, she supposed the council never expected to be attacked. They had grown too comfortable, too sure of their power. Her thoughts scattered as they reached the heavy double doors leading to the council chamber. The air still carried the stench of the prison, blocking out other scents. She would be entering the room blind. Soraya held her head high as the doors were pushed open. The two guards stationed beside them straightened, removing their spears from their crossed position and standing at attention. The moment she was shoved through the doorway, she stumbled forward, landing on her knees. Pain shot through her scraped skin, but before she could react, a rough hand grabbed her arm and yanked her upright. She swallowed the cry of pain that threatened to escape just as the doors slammed shut behind her. Extra guards took their positions as Soraya lifted her gaze, staring up at the councilmen. Disgust twisted their aged features, but none more than Councilman Benjamin, whose sneer made her stomach churn. Her eyes flickered to Robert, the only councilman she had once thought she could trust. He refused to meet her gaze, shame clear on his face. Coward! Soraya's lips curled into a smirk. If they sentenced her to death today, she would ensure she took as many of them with her as possible. Her line of work had never required a conscience, and she wasn't about to develop one now. Slayer T2, 4, 5, 7, 8. Soraya! Chairman Frank's voice boomed. You stand accused of treason against the council for the crime of falling in love. How do you plead? Soraya laughed, standing tall, her piercing gaze sweeping across the men who had controlled her life for centuries. Guilty. The councilman flinched, their discomfort satisfying her. I am guilty of serving this council through 3 generations of leaders. I am guilty of slaughtering countless beings in the name of your justice. I am guilty of molding future killers for the last 50 years. I am guilty of daring to ask for my freedom after 206 years of servitude, since I was but a child. Her voice was hoarse from weeks of disuse, but she didn't care. Enough, Benjamin barked, though his human vocal cords failed to give his command any real power. He had always been the most pathetic of them all. No! Soraya spat. I will not grovel before the men who have enslaved me, who have stolen my years for the sake of some so-called higher cause. This council is rotten, and I will gladly watch it burn. This council maintains peace, you ungrateful wench, Walter roared, his jowls shaking with fury. We feed you, clothe you, and this is the thanks we receive? I am not a wench, Soraya snarled, yanking at her chains, and I never submitted to your disgusting breeding program. I refuse to birth children into this miserable existence. They would be better off with wolves than raised as your pawns. Interesting, Henry mused, his dull green eyes flashing with calculation. Does this mean that the one who stole your heart is a werewolf? Soraya stilled, forcing herself not to react, but inside, her heart clenched. Really, would he have turned her after they mated? Would they have ruled together, raising a pack that thrived under their leadership? A life with him, it was all she had wanted, and now it was being ripped away. Still, she refused to break. The one who holds my heart is irrelevant, Soraya said, her shoulders sagging in fake defeat. She was far from finished. Benjamin sneered. I don't believe that. He shuffled through a stack of documents, his caramel-colored eyes burning with hatred. I did some digging. The new alpha in the north is named Kaeren, and your change of heart happened right after you visited his pack. Soraya's jaw clenched. Oh, what if it did? She deflected. But she knew Benjamin had already seen through her. The way I see it, we lost a valuable asset to that mutt, Benjamin sneered. So after your execution today, we'll be sending a team to eliminate Kaeren and his pack. Their deaths will be slow, painful. No. Soraya roared, yanking at her chains with all her strength. Metal groaned, and with a final pull the bindings snapped from their holes. You will not touch him. The rush of adrenaline that Mariazelladed her veins made her body stronger, faster. As the stale prison stench cleared from her nose, a new smell overtook it. Fear. Acidic, suffocating fear. She turned to the left, gripping the broken chain still attached to her wrists. With one swift movement she whipped them out, snapping a guard's neck before the others could react. In an instant she was surrounded. Bethany and several guards encircled her, weapons drawn, ready to strike. Soraya bared her teeth, raising her chains like whips. "Come on, then," she spat, a manic grin spreading across her face. "I'll kill you all, and I'll enjoy every second of it." "Bill." Frank's voice wavered with fear. Several guards lunged forward. But before their weapons could land, the doors to the chamber burst open. A wave of silence crashed over the room. And there he stood. Kaeren. His blue eyes, bloodshot and frantic, scanned the chaos until they landed on her. A brief flicker of relief crossed his face before it was swallowed by rage. His lips curled, a deep growl vibrating through the chamber. "I am Kaeren," he declared, his voice dark, possessive, "and I have come for what is mine." The moment the words left his mouth, all hell broke loose. Prisoners armed with stolen weapons stormed into the chamber, their bloodlust thick in the air. The slaughter had begun. Wanting to see what would happen next? Why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 8. As creatures of all kinds surged past him, Kaeren had eyes for only one. His mate, Soraya. Her red hair had grown longer, and her piercing green eyes locked onto his, unwavering as he strode toward her. The sword in his grip was ready to cut down anyone foolish enough to stand in his way. Two heavily armored guards stepped forward, attempting to block his path. Kaeren grinned. In a single, fluid motion he swung his blade, decapitating them both. Their lifeless bodies collapsed at his feet, and the remaining guards surrounding Soraya faltered, eyes darting for an escape. "Soraya," Kaeren breathed, her name slipping from his lips like a prayer, hot and possessive. "Kaeren," she responded, her voice thick with emotion as they finally reached each other. "I'm never letting you out of my sight again," Kaeren growled, the words more beast than man as he sliced through the chains that bound her. The moment she was free, she collapsed against him, their bodies pressing together. "I can live with that," Soraya murmured, a soft laugh escaping her lips as she melted into his embrace. They needed this, the solace only the other could provide. "I hate to interrupt." A sneering voice cut through their moment. "Step away from the traitor, werewolf." Kaeren let out a low, menacing snarl, making the slayer flinch, though she refused to back down. Without hesitation, Kaeren lunged at the woman, and Soraya was right beside him. As they struck, Kaelen's fist connected with her face while Soraya swept her legs out from under her. The woman hit the Maricello hard, barely managing to gasp before Kaeren drove his sword through her throat. A gurgled scream bubbled up, blood pooling beneath her as she twitched, then went still. "Alpha, the 5 councilmen fled down a passage. Shall we pursue?" Darian's voice slithered into Kaelen's mind, the vampire practically giddy at the idea of a hunt. "Have the pack shift," Kaelen commanded through the link Darian had established. "We're eradicating them." He scanned the chamber. The last remaining guards and slayers were already being slaughtered by the freed prisoners. The air was thick with the scent of death, bodies piling around them like discarded waste. "I'm shifting. Get on my back. We're going after those cowards," Kaelen said, already pulling off his shirt, handing his sword to Soraya for safekeeping. Let's see how they like being treated like the vermin they are, Soraya chuckled, her voice both haunting and intoxicating to Kaeren and his wolf. No more words were needed. Kaeren let his transformation overtake him, dropping from 2 legs to 4. His thick black fur shimmered in the dim light, the silver tip of his tail glinting as he lowered himself for Soraya to climb onto his back. Her hands curled into his fur, gripping tightly. With one powerful leap, he bounded toward the waiting pack, where June and the others stood ready. The moment they were together, Kaeren felt their minds merge as Darien grinned, his sharp fangs gleaming. "No mercy," Kaeren howled. "Only vengeance and death." Then he took off, leading them behind the massive painting that concealed the secret tunnel. Kaeren could already smell fresh air at the end of the corridor, but more than that, he scented the thick, sour stench of fear sweat from the councilmen. They would never make it out in time. They had dared to steal what was his. Now they would pay for it with their lives. Turning a sharp corner, Kaeren let out a low growl of delight as the councilmen's horrified faces came into view. "Councilman," Soraya purred, sliding off Kaelen's back, "allow me to introduce you to my mate and my pack." She stepped forward, the sword in her left hand scraping against the stone maracella, creating a trail of sparks. Kaelen's heart pounded as he watched her move with deadly grace. She selected her prey. Benjamin. With a flick of her wrist, she plunged the blade through his hand, pinning it to the cold ground. His scream echoed through the tunnel, full of agony. "Did you really think your cruelty wouldn't come back to bite you?" Soraya sneered, her eyes devoid of warmth as she loomed over him like a spectre of death. "Please," Benjamin whimpered, his face contorted in pain. "Spare me. I'll do anything you want. Just, please, don't kill me." Soraya let out a cold, mirthless laugh. "I don't think so. How does it feel, knowing you're at someone else's mercy? Reflect on that. As you enter the afterlife." Kaeren turned his attention to the other councilmen, who were desperately trying to crawl away. "Kill the rest," he ordered, voice laced with finality. The pack obeyed without hesitation. Darien was the first to strike, his fangs sinking into one councilman's throat, while his claws methodically sliced open the man's abdomen. The screams were deliciously raw, filled with terror and agony. By the time Darien was finished, his prey was nothing more than a blood-drained husk. Lyric took her target next, pinning the man beneath her massive form. Her sandy fur was quickly painted red as she ripped into him, tearing out his heart before crushing it between her jaws. Thorn and Isolde worked in tandem, dismantling another councilman limb by limb until there was nothing left but gore and shredded flesh. Isolde's pristine white fur was now streaked with crimson, a stark contrast to Thorn's grey coat. June took the final councilman, stripping the air from his lungs with an invisible force. He gasped, clawing at his throat as her magic twisted into razor-sharp wind needles that punctured his body from head to toe. When she was finished, he collapsed like a hollowed-out corpse. That left only one. Benjamin. Soraya smiled, slow and wicked, before severing his hands and feet, leaving him bleeding out on the maracella. "Please, don't do this," he whimpered, his voice nothing more than a weak, pitiful rasp. Soraya tilted her head, then beckoned Kaeren forward. Without hesitation, Kaeren delivered the final blow, tearing into Benjamin's stomach, throat, and limbs with merciless precision. He didn't stop until the councilman's final, gurgling breath left his ruined body. Silence fell over the tunnel, thick with the stench of blood and death. Kaeren felt hands bury into his fur, drawing his gaze downward. Soraya. Her green eyes shimmered with unshed tears, filled with overwhelming relief. "I thought I'd never see you again," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was so scared. All I could think about was you. How much I longed to be with you." Kaeren shifted back into his human form, immediately pulling her against his bare chest. His arms wrapped around her tightly as if anchoring her to him. His heart was full, whole now that she was finally here. "I love you," he murmured into her ear, voice raw with emotion. Tears slipped down Soraya's cheeks as she gazed up at him, her lips trembling. "I love you too." Kaeren cupped her face, brushing away a strand of hair before pressing his lips to hers. The kiss was slow, deep, filled with everything he felt. Love, desperation, relief, possession, longing. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice low but firm. "And I am never letting you go." Wanting to see what would happen next, why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 9. As they emerged from the tunnel, Soraya sagged in Kaelen's embrace, the exhaustion of her captivity finally overtaking her. She felt his arms tighten around her, his hold unyielding, pressing her against his chest as if he would never let her go again. Around them, the last remnants of the Council's forces were being eliminated. As the pack stepped into the grand chamber, a roar of cheers erupted. The prisoners, now freed, raised their voices in celebration as they spotted their saviors. Soraya wasn't sure if all of them had been innocent, but that hardly mattered to her in that moment. All she cared about was that she was with her mate, safe in the arms of the one person who had never given up on her. "You're all free now," Kaeren announced, his deep voice rumbling in Soraya's ear, soothing and grounding her. "Go, return to your homes, or forge your own paths." Another wave of cheers isolde before the prisoners scattered, some disappearing into the corridors while others rushed toward the open doors, eager to reclaim their freedom. As they departed, Soraya finally took in the full extent of the carnage left behind. The corpses of slayers and guards littered the ground, some missing limbs, others torn open, some drained of blood or suffocated by magic. She felt no sympathy. Every one of them had played a part in her imprisonment and punishment. They had chosen their side, and now they lay in heaps on the cold stone maricella, useless in death. A sneer curled her lips as she looked down at them, still cradled in Kaelen hold. "Is there anywhere we can rest? Some of us need time to heal before we travel," Lyric spoke, stepping up beside them. "Yes," Soraya replied, suppressing a yawn. "The Slayers' quarters, the tall tower with the grey roof, out in the courtyard." "All right," Kaelen said. "Let's head there, see if we can find a decent bed to sleep in tonight." Without another word, he strode toward the exit, carrying Soraya effortlessly. As they stepped into the open air, the scent of blood was less overwhelming. Soraya exhaled in relief, knowing the others likely felt the same. The battlefield inside had reeked of death, the heavy stench lingering. She lazily pointed toward the Slayer Tower before burying her face in Kaelen's neck, inhaling his scent. It was wild, untamed, and it wrapped around her like a blanket of warmth. The heat of his skin branded her as his, and the possessive way he held her left no doubt. He was covering her in his pheromones, reaffirming their bond. Soraya knew Kaelen was barely holding himself together. The sheer force of his will was the only thing keeping his instincts in check. "Careful," he growled into her ear, his voice deep, husky, and laced with promise. A shiver ran down her spine. She swallowed hard and pressed her face against his chest again, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat lulling her into the first peaceful sleep she had known in weeks. Kaelen let out a low chuckle as he felt Soraya completely relax in his arms. He knew how drained she was, and the fact that she felt safe enough to drift off sent a rush of endorphins through his system. His wolf purred with satisfaction. The primal urge to claim her simmered beneath the surface, but it was pushed aside by an even stronger need to care for and protect her. When they reached the Slayer quarters, Kaeren followed the lingering traces of her scent to what he assumed was her room. Inside, he took one glance around and felt his blood boil. The space was barely furnished. A bed, a small dresser, a simple table, and a chair. It looked more like a prison cell than a room meant for someone who had served the council for over 2 centuries. His grip on Soraya tightened slightly as memories of his own imprisonment flickered through his mind. Shaking his head, he shoved the thoughts away. That was in the past. She was with him now. Carefully, he walked to the bed and lay down, keeping Soraya pressed against his chest. He adjusted her slightly, mindful not to wake her. Her scent surrounded him, mixing with his own until the entire room smelled like them. Like home. For the first time in over a year, the beast within him settled, no longer demanding bloodshed or urging him to tear through anyone who stood between him and his mate. For the first time in over a year, Kaeren felt at peace. He let out a deep breath, his arms tightening slightly around Soraya as he whispered, "Sleep well, my love." Pressing a kiss to her head, he finally let himself rest. Darien smirked as he listened to the soft snores coming from their alpha and his mate. Finally, Kaeren was sleeping soundly, and for once Darien wouldn't have to worry about easing his nightmares. Now, Darien himself had fed well, ensuring that any wounds he had taken healed almost instantly. But not all of them had been as fortunate. Lyric had a few deep cuts, nothing serious, but they would take a few hours to fully mend. Thorn had suffered a fractured left arm, and Isolde had broken her nose and a few fingers. June, the Weather Witch, had emerged unscathed, though Darien knew it was because she had kept her distance, fighting from the shadows. As the pack's designated healer, Darien moved through them, tending to their injuries. He set bones and wrapped wounds, making sure everything was aligned properly so they could heal without complications. To his surprise, neither Thorn nor Isolde uttered a single complaint. They simply grit their teeth and bore the pain. He wished his human patients were this cooperative. Once he had finished, Darien found a room for himself and Lyric, pulling his mate close as they settled in. Lyric, his fierce, stubborn, incredible werewolf mate. His life had changed the moment he met her. Before the pack, he had been exiled, stripped of his home, forced to flee after losing a challenge to his older brother. Darien had fought, but his sibling was stronger, and even if he had won, the 10 newborn vampires waiting in the shadows would have overwhelmed him. His brother had always been one to abuse his power, recruiting more followers, turning humans recklessly, building an army for the sake of control. That was why Darien had never told his kin that he was still alive. He had no desire to return. This pack, this family, was his home now. A mate who had stolen his heart. A family he had built with his own hands. And that was all he needed. "I love you, my Lyric," Darien murmured, burying his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling her scent. A soft sigh escaped her lips. "I love you too." The words were sweet as honey, warm and soothing as they settled into his soul. Darien knew challenges still lay ahead. More battles would come. But with Lyric and his pack by his side, he would face them all without fear. Wanting to see what would happen next? Why not subscribe to this channel to get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories? Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 10. Soraya was the first to awaken, her slayer abilities granting her regeneration as powerful as a werewolf's. She felt the steady rise and fall of Kaelen's chest beneath her, his arms locked around her in an unrelenting embrace, the warmth of his hold, the solid weight of his body beside hers. It was bliss beyond words. After a year of separation, she never wanted to be apart from him again. Tilting her head to look at his face, Soraya frowned. There were dark circles beneath his eyes, his features gaunt, his body leaner than before. She knew the toll separation took on a werewolf, when they were aware their mate was alive, and for an alpha, it was far worse. A lump formed in her throat. "I'm so sorry, Kaeren," she whispered, her voice thick with guilt. She had believed she had no choice, that she had to remain loyal to the Council's commands, but that was a lie. Duty be damned. She should have stayed. They could have fought the Council together. She should have fought for them. Kaelin's voice, rough with sleep, startled her from her thoughts. "It's all right," he murmured, his tone husky and low. "I will always wait for you. I will always find you, and I will always kill for you." The intensity in his words sent a shiver through her. Her emerald eyes met his ice-gooble gaze, which was brimming with love, devotion, and a hunger so fierce it left her breathless. He looked at her as if she was the only woman in existence. "I love you," Soraya admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, but laced with unwavering truth. Her time apart from him had only strengthened what she already knew. Her heart belonged to Kaeren. "I love you too," Kaelen vowed, his voice deep with conviction. Then, without another second wasted, he dipped his head and captured her lips in a slow, deliberate kiss. The moment his mouth met hers, Soraya felt herself unravel. His touch ignited something inside her, a fire that burned through every inch of her being. He was consuming, intoxicating, hers. She wanted more. With a growl, she pushed him down onto the bed, straddling him. The evidence of his arousal pressed against her through his trousers, and her breath hitched as her hand skimmed over his bare chest, feeling the way his muscles tensed beneath her touch. His eyes, once icy blue, had turned molten gold. Kaelen grip tightened on her hips as she tossed aside her clothes, his hands digging into her skin as his eyes drank her in. "You're breathtaking," Kaelen rasped, before flipping them over, positioning himself above her, his body hot and firm against hers. Soraya barely had time to respond before he began his slow, torturous worship of her body. She had never known the touch of a man before, never allowed herself such an indulgence, but with Kaelen, her mate, everything felt right. Every caress, every whispered praise, every shuddering gasp. He devoured her like a starving man given his first taste of food in years, and she surrendered to him completely. When it was over, she bore his mark, the bite on her shoulder tingling as the transformation began. She had been trained to never allow a were-creature's bite to take hold. Slayers were warned against it, conditioned to avoid infection. But Soraya welcomed it. She wanted it. Becoming a wolf meant she could claim Kaelen as fully as he had claimed her. That was her last thought, before exhaustion overtook her again, and she drifted into a deep, peaceful slumber, cocooned in the warmth of her mate's arms. Kaelen lay awake, holding Soraya close, his fingers tracing idle patterns over her bare back. She was his. The mark on her shoulder was fresh, crimson against her fair skin. His wolf purred with satisfaction, reveling in the knowledge that she had accepted his claim. His soul, once fractured, was finally whole. He knew his pack had felt the ripple of their bond strengthening. His mate, his alpha female, would stand by his side for the rest of their lives. They would lead together, build a future, raise their offspring, grow old together. Kaelen wasn't sure if werewolves were truly immortal, but they lived longer than humans. Raziel, the African lion shifter he had once been imprisoned with, had mentioned something about their kind's longevity, but he had long forgotten the specifics. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Kaelen, is everything all right?" Darian's voice drifted through their telepathic link, laced with curiosity and amusement. Kaelen faintly heard the vampire's quiet footsteps just outside the room. "Everything is perfect," Kaelen answered, his tone softer than even he expected. "Good to hear, my friend," Darian replied. "When you're both ready, we'll set out for home. the weather witch June has decided to accompany us. Seems she's interested in joining the pack." Kaeren could practically hear the grin in the vampire's voice. "We'll be out in an hour or so," Kaeren said as he sat up slightly, shifting Soraya gently. "Make sure we have enough supplies for the journey, food, clothing, and enough provisions to last until we reach the first town." "It will be my utmost pleasure, Alpha," Darien said with a mock bow, before his footsteps retreated down the hallway. Kaeren leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to Soraya's temple. "Time to wake up, my love," he murmured, his lips grazing her skin. Soraya stirred, blinking sleepily up at him before stretching. Together they dressed in the clothes left for them, likely provided by Lyric, before making sure they were clean and ready to depart. By the time they stepped outside, the sun was nearly at its peak. Kaeren estimated it was just before midday. Waiting for them near the wagon, Darien and June sat holding the reins of the horses. Thorn, Lyric, and Isolde were already settled in the back. There was just enough room for Kaeren and Soraya to join them. Their horses were strong, and the weight of the wagon was well balanced, but Kaeren knew they would need to shift at some point to allow the horses a break. With ease, Kaeren climbed into the wagon before pulling Soraya up beside him. As he settled in, he realized something. He had everything he had ever wanted. A mate. A family. "Let's go home," Kaeren said, a rare grin spreading across his face as he pulled Soraya against him. "As you wish, Alpha," Darien smirked, snapping the reins. "Much good does it. Let us die." The horses surged forward, pulling the wagon away from the ruins of the Slayer Council. As they left, Kaeren watched June murmur an incantation, her hands weaving in intricate motions. Dark storm clouds rolled in, and then lightning struck. A deafening crack echoed through the air as several bolts rained down upon the remnants of the council fortress, setting fire to the earth. Flames erupted, consuming the buildings within minutes. A second spell from June shifted the wind, feeding the inferno. Soraya shivered beside him, before sighing and pressing herself closer to his warmth. Kaeren smiled in silent gratitude toward the witch, before turning away from the destruction. They had severed their ties to the past. Now it was time to move forward. It was time to go home. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 11. Isolde sat at the back of the wagon, gazing at her pack with quiet affection. Darien and Lyric were seated up front, the vampire handling the reins with ease, while Lyric leaned into his side, her contentment clear. Their alpha, Kaeren, was curled up with his mate Soraya, the two of them still inseparable after reuniting. Then there was June, the small weather witch, who, for reasons even she may not fully understand, had chosen to stay with them. And finally there was her own mate, Thorn. He lay with his head resting in her lap, his soft snores rhythmic and steady. Isolde absent-mindedly combed her fingers through his light brown hair, reveling in the warmth of his presence. She loved him with every fibre of her being and was endlessly grateful for the moment fate had led them to each other. Her fingers traced over the long scar running from his collarbone to his neck, and a familiar rage burned beneath her skin. Her wolf stirred, claws scraping at the edges of her mind as the memories of his past resurfaced. The day she learned of his suffering, she had been consumed by bloodlust, a rage so uncontrollable that she had slaughtered 3 men before Kaelin's firm command had finally reeled her back. Even now, the thought of the circus that had once held him captive made her want to tear through flesh and bone without hesitation. If she ever found them, not even the fear of disobeying her alpha would stop her from giving in to the hunger for vengeance. A small whimper escaped Thorn's sleeping form, pulling her from her thoughts. She exhaled, resuming the soothing motion of her fingers running through his hair, humming softly. The pack turned toward her, curious. She hesitated for a moment before allowing the melody to take form, her voice trembling before smoothing into something soft and warm. "You're safe, you're all right, and I'll never leave your side." Her voice filled the space around them, gentle yet unwavering. "I will run beside you through eternity. I will hunt with you and love you for as long as time allows." Thorn's breathing evened out, his body fully relaxing. "You are my one and only, my dear mate. I love you, and I will never change you." As she finished, silence followed, save for the steady rhythm of the wheels beneath them.
That was beautiful, Isolde, Lyric finally said, awe evident in her tone. Though they had spent plenty of time together, this was the first time she had ever heard Isolde sing. Isolde blushed. "I'm not that great of a singer." "Not that great," June scoffed. "If I had a voice like that, I'd be drowning in gold." Soraya nodded in agreement, flashing Isolde a warm smile. Isolde's blush deepened, but before she could argue further, Darien spoke up. "We've reached our first stop on the journey home," he announced in a cheerful tone. "We'll stay the night, rest, and gather supplies in the morning. Then we continue home," Kaelen said, his voice leaving no room for discussion. "Yes, Alpha," they all responded in unison. Kaelen rolled his eyes at the formality, still adjusting to the weight of the title. Kaelen remained watchful as they entered the town, his senses sharp. The stares from the locals were wary, their gazes filled with quiet distrust. He knew how small towns functioned. Always suspicious of outsiders, always quick to judge those who did not belong. His eyes locked onto the marshals as they passed through the dirt road. The man nodded in acknowledgement, and Kaelen returned the gesture. They had stopped here on their way to Soraya. He had hoped the town would be more welcoming this time around. When Darien pulled the wagon into the stables, Kaelen was the first to hop down, reaching up to help Soraya. She accepted, only for mischief to spark in her green eyes as she gave him a playful shove. Kaelen lost his balance, and before he could react, they tumbled together onto the dusty ground. "Enjoy your trip, Kaelen," Soraya teased, giggling as he retaliated by trailing his fingers up her sides, making her squirm. "Of course, my love," Kaelen smirked, his deep chuckle vibrating against her skin. "Any trip with you is a good one." Lyric hopped down from the front, tossing a few coins to the stable boy to tend to the horses. She grinned at the sight of Kaelen and Soraya still tangled together. Together one day, and if this is what we're in for, things are about to get lively, Lyric quipped. Kaelen pulled Soraya up and into his side before turning to address the pack. "Don't get too carried away. We'll regroup at the same inn we stayed in last time," Kaelen instructed. Then his gaze flicked to Darien. "And try not to break any bones this time." Darien scoffed. "That happened once. And it wouldn't have happened if the bastard hadn't insulted Lyric." Lyric smirked at her mate. "That's my vampire. Thorn wants to check out the blacksmith shop again," Isolde said as she adjusted her grip on her mate's hand, who was still half asleep. "Go ahead. See you both at the inn," Kaelen nodded. Darien stretched before glancing at Lyric. "We'll handle the inn arrangements." Kaelen gave them a brief nod before watching them disappear into town. "You coming with us to the diner, June?" he asked, turning to the witch. "Or is there somewhere else you'd rather go?" June hesitated before shaking her head. "I'll stay with the horses for now. Let my magic feel out the town." Kaelen nodded, knowing the witch still wasn't entirely comfortable in large human settlements. "All right, we'll be back soon." With that, he took Soraya's hand and led her toward the diner. Once seated, they ordered a sizable meal. Kaelen grinned as Soraya devoured her food, pleased to see that the changes from their mating had already begun. She was eating like a wolf now, her appetite growing to match her new nature. The beast within him rumbled in approval. But what made him grin even wider was the jealousy in her eyes. When the waitress lingered just a little too long at their table, her tone too sweet as she spoke to him. Soraya's growl was soft but unmistakable. Kaelen bit back his laughter. Please, beyond words. After their meal, they regrouped with the others at the inn for the night. They departed at midday the next day, the wagon stocked with supplies and a new set of clothes for Soraya. Kaelen sat with his mate tucked against his side, his thoughts focused on the journey ahead. The full moon would rise before they reached home. Soraya's first shift. The first transformation was always the hardest. The pain, the sheer agony was something no one could prepare for, but she wouldn't face it alone. She would have him, she would have the pack. And when the time came, they would guide her through it together. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent, interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you.
Chapter 12. Soraya whimpered as she lay sprawled on the forest maricela. Agony consumed her, her body burning from the inside out, her strength fading rapidly. She was falling apart, her very bones shifting and stretching in ways she had never imagined. She had been warned about the first transformation. She had known it would be painful, but nothing could have prepared her for this. Her skin felt as though it were peeling away in strips, heat radiating off her in visible waves. Another surge of pain struck, forcing a scream past her half-shifted mouth. A tortured sound caught between a human's wail and an animal's cry. "Help!" Soraya whimpered, the word emerging as more of a desperate, primal plea. "You've got this, my love," Kaelen murmured, his voice tight with restrained fear. "Don't fight it. Let it take over." His encouragement was all she needed. With one final, piercing scream, Soraya surrendered. Her spine cracked and realigned. Her tail sprouted. Her arms and legs lengthened, her fingers retracting into claws. Her ears rotated, her skull reshaping, elongating into a muzzle. Then silence. Kaelen's voice, thick with awe, reached her ears. "Wow." Soraya wobbled on unsteady legs, adjusting to her new form. The world was sharper, clearer, overwhelming. Every scent assaulted her at once. The rich, earthy aroma of damp soil, the crispness of the wind, the musk of animals hidden in the underbrush. She could smell everything, the trees, the grass, even the droppings of small creatures she really wished she couldn't smell. Her instincts were screaming, her legs trembling as she tried to keep her balance. She turned, eyes locking onto Kaelen as he shifted effortlessly. His transition was smooth, natural, completely painless. His wolf was massive, fur as dark as night, save for the silver tip on his tail. His eyes gleamed a brilliant gold, intense and unyielding, as he stepped toward her. Despite the lingering aches in her new body, she felt instantly calmed as he closed the space between them. He brushed against her, rubbing his scent into her fur before tilting his head and licking under her chin in greeting. Soraya instinctively returned the gesture, pressing into him, her wolf rumbling in approval. The beast inside her had finally settled, its presence distinct yet fully intertwined with her own consciousness. It was an odd sensation, having a separate entity within her influencing her emotions, her desires. But there was no fear. Because both she and her wolf adored Kaelen too much to ever consider resisting their new reality. As he pulled away, Soraya turned her attention to her packmates, taking them in with fresh eyes. Lyric's coat was sandy, her tail tipped with silver. Thorn was a scarred grey, battle-worn but strong. Isolde's fur was a brilliant white, untouched by markings. Curious, she reached out through the mind link. "What color am I?" "You're a striking red," Darian responded, his voice echoing in her head. And your tail has that silver tip just like Kaeren. Seems like all the wolves he turns inherited. Startled by the intrusion into her thoughts, Soraya let out a sharp snarl, her ears pinning back as she spun to face the vampire. It's just Darian's ability, Kaeren chuckled, nudging her playfully. You've never been linked before, have you? Feeling a bit foolish, Soraya huffed, but gave a small nod in understanding. I'll stay with the wagon, June announced, her voice breaking through their connection. You all should hunt before Soraya gets a taste of a wolf's hunger. Soraya's ears perked as all eyes turned to the witch. Good idea. Darian grinned, flashing his fangs in anticipation. Stick close to me, Kaeren said, his voice intimate through the mind link. I won't let anything happen to you. Then, with a powerful leap, he took off into the trees. Without hesitation, Soraya bolted after him. Her legs no longer felt awkward. They carried her with ease, her body built for speed, for power. The wind rushed past her, her senses sharpening further with each stride. For the first time in her life, she felt free. Overcome with exhilaration, she pushed herself faster, playfully lunging at Kaeren and tackling him to the ground. She let out a soft growl, her muzzle inches from his. Kaeren merely huffed, nipping at her nose before effortlessly rolling back onto his feet, leading her toward their prey. The others slowed, and Soraya did the same, her ears twitching as she heard Darian shifting above in the trees. Then the scent hit her. Deer, a full herd. Her tail wagged as she pinpointed every detail, their ages, their conditions, the weakest among them. You take point, Kaeren instructed through the link. Isolde and Thorn will flank. Lyric and I will cut off their escape. We only need 3 or 4. Yes, Alpha, they all responded in perfect synchrony. What about me? Darian chimed in, his voice dripping with feigned offense. Stay on Soraya. Make sure she doesn't lose focus, Kaeren said, making Soraya huff in protest. She didn't need a babysitter. But the sheer excitement coursing through her veins said otherwise. Understood, Darian teased, and she swore she could hear the smirk in his voice. Go. At Kaelen's command, Soraya launched forward. She moved at speeds she had never dreamed of, her body a blur as she tore into the herd. Chaos erupted. Deer scattered in every direction, but Soraya had already chosen her target. A young buck, fast but not fast enough. Darian was right beside her, matching her pace with unnatural ease. She barely registered his presence, too focused on the hunt. She lunged, nipping at the buck's hindquarters, the tang of blood igniting something primal in her veins. The moment the metallic taste hit her tongue, she lost herself. A deep, guttural snarl ripped from her throat as she surged forward, launching onto the deer's back. Her jaws snapped at its neck, missing a few times before she finally latched on. With a sharp, powerful bite, she crushed its windpipe. The buck crumbled beneath her, its final breath escaping in a strangled gasp. But she didn't hesitate. She tore into its flesh, her teeth sinking deep, ripping muscle and sinew, blood coating her muzzle like war paint. Somewhere in the chaos she sensed Darian feasting at the animal's throat, drinking deeply. But she didn't care. She gorged herself, lost in the raw, instinctual need to consume. By the time she came back to herself, all that remained was the buck's head, 2 legs, and its rib cage. A low whistle caught her attention. Damn girl, Lyrith murmured, lowering herself in deference to Soraya, acknowledging her as alpha female. Isolde chuckled. The first kill is always the most brutal. Soraya licked the blood from her muzzle, a pang of guilt surfacing. I didn't leave any for you. Don't worry, love, Kaeren reassured, his own fur still damp with blood. We caught more than enough. Relieved, Soraya exhaled, shaking out her fur. With their hunger sated, they returned to the wagon, where June greeted them with a knowing smile but kept her distance. Then, one by one, the wolves collapsed into a massive pile. Soraya curled into Kaeren, his warmth a comfort against the cool night air. Lyric nestled beside her, Darian draped across her back. Isola and Thorn curled around her legs, shielding her from the wind. Pressed close, wrapped in the security of her pack, exhaustion finally claimed her. They were almost home, and Soraya couldn't wait. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 13. As Kaeren crossed into his territory, a wave of relief washed over him. It was a peace he hadn't felt in weeks, not since they had first set out to retrieve his mate. Now, with Soraya safely beside him and the wagon rolling up to his cabin, his wolf stirred with restless energy. The primal part of him itched to reclaim his land, to reassert his presence alongside his mate. I'm trusting all of you to unpack while I take Soraya around to refresh the territory markers, Kaeren said as he leapt down from the wagon, sidestepping just in time to avoid Soraya, who landed lightly beside him. It's been too long since we've reinforced our scent, and I don't want anything lurking around that doesn't belong. Of course, Alpha, Lyrit replied warmly, taking Darian's offered hand as she stepped down. Satisfied, Kaeren strode a few paces away, peeling off his clothes as he moved. There was no need to ruin another set. The shift overtook him effortlessly, his muscles twisting and reshaping until he stood in his powerful wolf form. A deep growl of satisfaction rumbled through him as he shook out his thick black fur, inhaling the familiar, grounding sense of home. Go on, Soraya, Isolde teased. He hasn't run off yet, because he's waiting for you to shift. Soraya hesitated, still sore from her first full moon transformation 3 days ago. Do you all shift again so soon after the full moon? The more often you do it, the less painful it becomes, Lyria reassured her with a knowing smile, as Thorn heaved a pile of luggage from the wagon. Kaeren huffed in impatience before an idea sparked. With a playful flick of his tail, he swiped it across Soraya's face, chuffing happily when she bopped him on the nose in response. All right, I'll shift. Soraya laughed, surprised by his mischievous side, especially given how imposing he looked in his massive wolf form. At her words, Kaeren let out a pleased yip, his tail wagging slowly as he watched her undress. When she shifted, her red fur was vibrant against his inky black, her scent stronger, wilder, more his. Their pheromones had fully mingled now, their bond strengthened since their mating. She had yet to mark him in return, but she would. Her wolf would need it, just as his had. With a deep snarl of excitement, Kaeren launched forward, sprinting into the forest, and rushed past his face, his muscles moving effortlessly as his paws pounded against the earth. Behind him, Soraya's scent lingered in the air, her footfall steady as she kept pace. They ran together, 2 wolves moving as one beneath the golden mid-morning sun. Stopping at each marking spot, they refreshed their territory, either by urinating or clawing at the trees and soil. Kaelen's heart swelled. He had never felt this weightless, this whole. His past had always tainted his view of the world, but Soraya had shattered that darkness in such a short time. A sharp bark snapped him out of his thoughts. Soraya stood rigid, her hackles raised, a low growl rolling from her throat. Kaeren instantly went on high alert, his ears pricked as he followed her gaze. Something was coming, and it wasn't friendly. A chilling scream rang through the air, and Kaeren didn't hesitate. The scent that hit him next turned his blood to ice. A child. Snarling, he tore forward, his heart hammering in his chest. Soraya reached the scene first, and the raw fury in her snarl sent a shudder through him. She lunged, her powerful strides closing the distance between her and the mountain lion. Too big to be ordinary. A shifter. Kaeren barely caught flashes of their violent struggle, teeth gnashing, claws slashing, blood splattering against the ground. He let out an anxious whimper but forced himself to stay focused. His nose caught a faint pulse of life. A child's scent, fragile and trembling. Kaeren followed it, heart pounding. Nestled in the underbrush, a little girl, no older than 6, stared up at him through tear-gilled eyes, her small hands clutching at the dirt beneath her. "Please," she sobbed, her tiny body shaking. Kaeren lowered himself, pressing his massive head close to her, his breath fanning over her delicate frame. She should have been afraid. Any child would have screamed, cowered, run. But she held his gaze, her small chest heaving, and Kaeren understood. The sense of 2 shifters clung to her. She wasn't just any child. She was a lynx shifter. A broken cry escaped her lips, morphing midway into a sharp, feline hiss. The body convulsed, instinct forcing her first shift. Her cries were agonizing, her tiny frame trembling with each painful snap of bone. Kaeren stayed beside her, his presence unwavering, even as the lion lunged at him in one last, desperate attempt. Soraya intercepted, her body a shield between him and the beast. The battle raged. Kaeren could only watch in awe and horror as she dismantled the lion shifter with brutal precision. When it was finally over, the cub lay curled on the ground, her spotted grey fur speckled with blood, but her heartbeat was steady. Soraya, covered in cuts, none fatal, stepped beside him, her muzzle soaked in crimson.
Kaeren licked beneath her jaw in quiet praise. A deep, satisfied growl rumbled from her chest. She was his alpha female. Whining softly, Kaeren gently picked up the cub by the scruff, adjusting his grip carefully so he wouldn't harm her. Soraya led the way back, her steps steady, purposeful. They passed the lion's corpse, its body intact save for its head. Kaeren swallowed. Her attacks had been calculated, each wound inflicted with deliberate precision. Slayers were dangerous. But a slayer turned werewolf? Kaeren now understood just how terrifying that combination was, and he wasn't sure whether he should feel proud or uneasy. Soraya shifted first as they neared the cabin, her gaze unfocused for only a moment before concern softened her expression. Kaeren gently laid the unconscious cub down before shifting as well, immediately scooping her back up. "Darian," Kaeren called as he strode inside, his adrenaline still high. The vampire appeared instantly. "Hand her here." He cradled the cub with practiced ease, his hands moving swiftly. "Her heart is strong. She'll make it. Let me clean and dress her wounds." Kaelin's body finally eased as he watched the cub's breathing, steady, her soft inhales turning into quiet snores. "What about the body?" Soraya asked as she stepped inside, now clothed, her skin free of blood. She tossed Kaelen his pants, which he gratefully slipped on. "Thorn and Isolde are already handling it," Lyric answered, stepping into the room with a blanket and food. "What about her parents?" June's quiet voice came from behind Lyric, her small frame almost hidden behind the she-wolf. "Dead," Soraya said softly. The scent of their death was all over him. Silence filled the room. So, "What do we do?" June pressed, frowning. Lyric didn't hesitate. "We take care of her. We raise her until she's old enough to decide her own path." Darian kissed Lyric's knuckles, smiling. "Well said, my love." "A new pack member," Thorn said as he entered with Isolde, his tone carrying the certainty of a wolf who had already accepted her as family. Isolde chuckled. "It seems our little group of misfits keeps growing." Kaelen finally relaxed as he sank onto the couch, pulling Soraya into his lap. She leaned into him fully, her warmth grounding him, her scent soothing his every frayed nerve. On their first day back, they had already gained a new packmate. Hopefully, their presence alone would be enough to ward off future intrusions. Get some rest, Isolde said, smiling knowingly. I'm sure your jobs will want you back soon enough. Kaelen exhaled deeply. They were home. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you.
Chapter 14. June silently observed the pack as they tended to the little link shifter with remarkable care. The child had been under their watchful eyes for several days now, adjusting to life without her parents. Though her physical wounds had healed swiftly under Darian's skilled treatment and the natural resilience of a shifter's body, the emotional scars ran far deeper, ones that might never fade. June understood that pain all too well. The ache of a past that still lingered. The constant battle between moving forward and being trapped by memories too painful to forget. Needing air, June stepped out of the cabin, inhaling deeply as she let the fresh forest scents ground her. The cool breeze caressed her skin, easing the tempest raging inside her chest. As a weather witch, the wind had always been her solace, a force of nature that echoed her emotions, shifting between violent storms and tranquil breezes. She wandered further, her feet leading her towards the stable, seeking solitude. Climbing the ladder to the loft, June perched on the ledge above the horse pens, her legs swinging as she hummed softly. The rhythmic stomping of hooves and the occasional snort from the horses filled the space, their presence grounding her in the moment. Yet, as she closed her eyes, memories Maris sailoded in. Her past, her mother, her coven. A witch's coven functioned much like a wolf pack, structured around a leader, the coven head. For June, that leader had been her mother, Grace. A formidable woman revered for mastering not one but two elemental forces, weather and fire. June shuddered at the thought of the latter. Fire had been her mother's preferred punishment. Unconsciously, her fingers traced the burn that marred her left arm right over the faded mark of her former coven. There had been painless ways to remove a witch's mark, but her mother had chosen the most excruciating method of banishment. Oh, flame! June swallowed, the memory twisting like a knife in her gut. She forced herself to remember the words she had clung to for years. Do not dwell in the past. Look back only to learn. But it was impossible to forget. She had never been special in her mother's eyes. That privilege had been reserved for her elder siblings, Rylan, Hugo, and Stella. Rylan, the eldest, destined to take over as coven head. Hugo, a rare male witch, born to her mother and a human father, an anomaly that had made him the pride of their bloodline. And Stella, perfect, pampered Stella who cried whenever things didn't go her way. Compared to them, June had been nothing. Unwanted, unloved, a defect. Her cursed white hair had set her apart, a stark contrast to the platinum locks of her mother and sisters. Her dull grey eyes lacked the vibrancy of her family's brilliant hues. And worst of all, her height. At barely 5 feet tall, June was a perpetual child in the eyes of others, forever mistaken for someone younger. Her mother had been ill during her pregnancy, stunting her growth in the womb. It was just another reason for the coven to view her as lesser. A mistake. Tears welled in June's eyes as she curled into herself, hugging her knees to her chest. She was a woman grown, but would never be more. Small hands, small frame, small voice. Her mother had made sure she knew it. But it wasn't just the cruel words. Tension had always been high within the coven. A gathering of witches, each wielding deadly magic, was a volatile thing. One wrong move could lead to devastation. And that was exactly what happened the night her siblings tried to dispose of her. They had cornered her, drugged her with sleeping powder, and dragged her to a man she had once believed would court her, a man she had naively thought would one day ask for her hand in marriage. But he had not been the kind soul she had imagined. She had been nothing more than a pawn. The truth had hit her like a storm, shattering the illusion. He was a monster, a predator, a man who had harmed countless innocent children, and she had been blind to it. In her panic, her magic had exploded. The force of her power had obliterated him, and in the chaos, Stella had been caught in the destruction. Hugo had survived, but he had been permanently altered. Only Rylan had emerged unscathed, shielded by her magic, untouched by the consequences of their betrayal. For a brief moment, June had felt free, but freedom never lasted. Her mother had arrived moments later, had seen Stella's lifeless body, had witnessed Hugo's injuries, and all of her mother's grief, all of her fear had turned on June. The punishment had been instant. June had barely registered the searing pain before she was thrown by a forceful wind, her mother's combined powers tearing her away from the only home she had ever known. Banished. She had run barefooted and alone, fleeing the only world she had ever known. She had nearly died that night, and then a grey werewolf had appeared, and the rest was history. June. Her name cut through the weight of her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. Darian stood at the base of the loft, his emerald eyes filled with understanding. June quickly wiped her cheeks dry, forcing a small smile. Darian, I didn't see you there. Did you need something?" She flinched as he effortlessly vaulted into the loft, not even bothering with the ladder. Clearly he wasn't planning to leave her alone. "June, have I ever told you how I, a vampire, ended up with a pack of wolves?" Darian asked, settling onto the hay beside her. Intrigued despite herself, June shook her head. "No, you haven't. Honestly, I don't know much about how you all came together, just bits and pieces." Darian exhaled, his usual teasing smirk replaced with something softer. "Before I start, I want you to hear this."
His voice was steady, unwavering. No one is perfect. We all make mistakes, and when you live as long as we do, those mistakes will follow you. You are not unworthy. You are not a mistake. You are beautiful, and you deserve love. And that is my strongest wish for you. His words struck something deep inside her. Darian sighed. "I'm sorry for reading your thoughts, but I couldn't sit by and watch a pack member suffer in silence." June's lip trembled as more tears gathered in her eyes. For so long, she had believed she was undeserving of care. But here was Darian, someone who had no reason to offer her kindness, giving it freely. Her voice wavered. "Lyric is lucky to have you, Darian." He chuckled, shaking his head. "No, I'm lucky to have her." June let out a watery laugh, warmth blooming in her chest. Hope. It was dangerous to feel it, but for the first time in years, she let it take root. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't meant to be alone forever. Taking a deep breath, she turned to Darian. "Tell me your story." And just like that, the storm inside her began to settle. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent, interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you.
Chapter 15. Kaeren smirked as he pulled back his axe, raising it high before bringing it down in one clean, powerful motion. The thick log beneath him split into two with a sharp crack, the sound echoing in the crisp air. He had been chopping wood for the past 2 hours, ensuring they had enough firewood for the cabin in the coming weeks. It was a mindless task, repetitive and monotonous, yet it gave his arms a satisfying burn that kept his muscles engaged. Even as he worked, he could feel a gaze on him. His wolf preened under the attention, well aware of who was watching him. Soraya sat on the wooden swing at the front porch, slowly rocking back and forth as she nursed a steaming cup of tea. A thick blanket draped over her lap, her relaxed posture betraying the comfort she found in simply watching him. She had cut her hair again, an old habit from years of needing it short and out of the way. Kaeren doubted she'd ever fully break the routine. Still, she was stunning, and the way she looked at him sent a thrill through his body. Dressed in her worn duster coat and wide-brimmed cowboy hat, she exuded the same rugged charm that had drawn him to her from the start. There was something about the roughness of her exterior that made him want to pull her close and never let go. His pack had gone into town that morning to tend to their responsibilities. Lyric had taken Raina, the lynx cub, to school, hopeful that she would find comfort in routine and perhaps make some friends along the way. Isolde had picked up work at a local clothing shop, though she was still deciding what she truly wanted to do. Thorn had settled into the blacksmith's forge, growing closer with the town's resident craftsman, Forge. He often came back with weapons, and now that they had a former slayer in their pack, Kaeren wondered if Soraya would be willing to test them. Darian had taken up the position as the town's lead doctor, training new apprentices while tending to both humans and supernaturals alike. Then there was June. She still struggled with going into town.
Kaeren understood. Her past was just as bloody as the rest of theirs, perhaps even more. He had sent her on a simple errand to pick up fresh produce, hoping to give him and Soraya some time alone at the cabin. With one final chop, Kaeren straightened, wiping the sweat from his brow as he surveyed his work. The pile of firewood was stacked neatly, enough to last them for a while. Satisfied, he set his axe aside and turned toward the porch. Soraya was already watching him with a knowing smirk, her green eyes filled with amusement. Kaelen's steps were swift, eager, as he crossed the distance between them. Without hesitation, he settled onto the swing beside her and pulled her into his side. As he buried his face in her hair, he breathed deeply, letting her scent ground him. A sense of peace settled over him, something he had not felt in so long. "I hope Raina is doing okay at school," Soraya murmured, her voice tinged with quiet concern. Kaeren tightened his hold on her, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. "Lyric is with her," he reassured, his voice steady. "And you know how Lyric is. She'd fight anyone who so much as looks at that kid the wrong way." "I know." "Oh," Soraya sighed, shifting slightly against him. "I just can't help but worry. She's still so young. And after everything she's been through, I just want her to be happy." Kaelen smiled against her skin, his fingers tracing small patterns on her arm. "You have a kind heart, Soraya," he murmured, his voice low and warm. "I'm grateful we found her when we did." A shiver ran through her, and Kaelen grinned as he felt her reaction. "Oh, you know," Soraya purred, adjusting so that she was straddling his lap. "We are alone right now." Kaelen chuckled, his hands automatically finding her waist. The honeymoon phase of their bond was in full swing, and neither of them could get enough of each other. Her lips trailed along his jaw, pressing open-mouthed kisses against his skin, and before he knew it, their lips crashed together in a heated kiss. Kaelen groaned, his grip tightening on her hips as she moved against him. The intensity between them built quickly, his wolf growling in approval as Soraya tugged at his hair, her breathless moans sending heat pooling in his gut. Kaelen barely managed to pull back, his chest heaving as he took in her disheveled hair, her flushed skin, the raw hunger in her golden eyes. "Kaelen," she whispered, her voice a plea. "I need you." He swallowed hard, his control fraying at the edges. "Bedroom," he growled, standing effortlessly with her in his arms. But before they could make it inside, a scent hit Kaelen like a bucket of cold water. His muscles tensed. Through the haze of desire, recognition flared in his mind. Soraya stiffened in his arms, her nostrils flaring. A growl rumbled deep in her chest, low and threatening. Kaelen sighed, already knowing what he had to do. It's okay, he murmured against her ear, pressing a kiss to her temple. This one's a friend. Soraya's eyes narrowed. A friend? Kaelen smirked. An old friend. He reluctantly set her down, smoothing a hand over her hip before stepping back. We can definitely pick this up later, he promised, his voice thick with unspoken need. Better, Soraya huffed, her golden eyes flickering with frustration and unfulfilled hunger. Kaelen chuckled, leaning in to brush his lips over hers one last time. Then, reluctantly, he turned toward the forest. Wait here for Rainy and Lyric, he asked, glancing over his shoulder. Soraya rolled her eyes, but nodded. Yeah, just don't take too long. Kaelen smirked. I'll be quick. Shrugging out of his clothes, he shifted, ignoring the appreciative growl from his mate. His powerful paws dug into the earth as he took off into the woods, the wind whipping through his fur. It didn't take long to reach the border of his land. Pacing along the edge of his territory was a large male lion, his tawny mane streaked with black. Recognition sparked in Kalen's chest, and he stepped forward, his lips curling back in a low growl. The lion's ears flicked, and in the blink of an eye, he shifted. Where the beast once stood, a man now remained. Kaelen stalked closer, his movements fluid as he shifted into his own human form. Alpha, the lion shifter greeted, bowing his head slightly in respect. Kaelen smirked. Oh, come on, old friend. Just call me by my name. The tension in the lion's shoulders eased. It's been too long, Kaelen. I see the years have treated you well. And I could say the same to you, Raziel, Kaelen replied, his grin widening. Come on in, I don't bite. Raziel took a step forward, then hesitated. Your pack? They'll be okay with a lion crossing into their territory? Kalen's smirk turned sly. I don't bite, he repeated. What may might? Raziel's expression went from curiosity to mild horror. You have a mate, Kaelen laughed. Oh, it gets better. She's a former slayer. Raziel choked. You did what? Kaelen clapped a hand on his shoulder, grinning. Come on, he chuckled. I'll tell you everything on the way back. With that, he shifted, his wolf bounding forward. Raziel let out a long-suffering sigh before shifting as well. Together, the two old friends made their way back to the cabin. Kaelen just hoped his mate wouldn't kill him for the unexpected guest. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you.
Chapter 16. Raziel felt a fresh wave of anxiety settle over him as Kaelen pack surrounded him, their expressions a mix of curiosity, suspicion, and cautious acceptance. Some gazes were unreadable, emotions flickering too quickly for Raziel to decipher. His lion stirred uneasily as he studied the pack members, his instincts sharpening under their scrutiny. His eyes first landed on two wolves, clearly mates, who remained in their wolf forms. The male was heavily scarred, his grey fur rough and battle-worn, while the female had a pure white coat, her stance protective and unwavering. Raziel could tell right away that the male was a beta, and a strong one at that. As soon as their eyes met, the grey wolf let out a low, warning growl. Raziel quickly averted his gaze, acknowledging the unspoken threat. Next, he shifted his attention to a she-wolf in human form. She carried herself with the authority of a beta, one Kaelen had personally made. Beside her stood a vampire, positioned half a step in front of her, his posture both casual and protective. Mates, Raziel realized. Then his gaze landed on her. Kaelen, mate. The slayer turned. The urge to step back, to give himself space, gripped him, but he held his ground. Her reputation preceded her, and his lion was instinctively wary of the woman who had once hunted their kind. But Kaelin's presence beside her, calm and unbothered, reassured him enough to stay still, Shh. The tension in the air shifted slightly as Kaeren stepped forward, cradling a small girl in his arms. A cub, lynx if Raziel nose wasn't mistaken. She was young, delicate, and clung to Kaeren like he was her entire world. As Raziel studied her, she turned her face into Kaelen's chest, small whimpers escaping her lips. "It's okay," Kaelen murmured, his voice gentle. "She just needs some time. I'll explain later." "If you say so, old friend," Razamor replied, taking a step back as Kaelen's mate moved to stand at his side. A light nudge at Kaelen's hip drew his attention, and Raziel watched as the former slayer smirked up at her mate. "Introduce us, dear," she encouraged, amusement in her tone. "The tension is awful." Kaelen let out a chuckle, shaking his head before addressing the group. "My apologies," he said smoothly. "Everyone, this is Raziel, an African lion shifter. He's an old friend of mine, and I expect all of you to treat him with respect." A murmured "yes, Alpha" rippled through the pack, though Raziel still caught glimpses of lingering wariness in their eyes. Kaelen continued the introductions. "This is my mate Soraya, former slayer, and now our alpha female." Raziel inclined his head in silent acknowledgement, though the raw power radiating from the woman made his lion instinctively tread carefully. "There, in wolf form, we have Isolde and Thorn," Kaelen went on, motioning toward the previously growling pair. Their posture had loosened slightly, no longer seeing him as an immediate threat. Can her mate Darien stand beside them? "And yes, Darien is a vampire," Kaelen added, his lips twitching into a knowing smirk. Raziel turned toward the vampire, noting the easy confidence in his stance. He was clearly comfortable among the wolves, something Raziel wouldn't have expected from a vampire in a werewolf's territory. "And lastly," Kaelen said, shifting the child in his arms slightly, "this little one is Raina, and we also have June, our newest addition, but she isn't fond of new people. She's in the barn. Go introduce yourself later." Raziel took it all in, nodding slowly. "My Kaelen," he murmured, glancing between them all. "Your pack is certainly unique." Kaelen grinned. "And you're welcome to stay as long as you need." Raziel blinked in mild surprise at the open invitation. "You're too nice sometimes, Kaelen," he huffed, shaking his head. Amusement rippled through the pack, with several members nodding in agreement. But before Raziel could respond further, a small voice broke through the conversation. "But Alpha," Raina's wide, teary eyes locked onto him. "Isn't he the same as the one who killed Mummy and Daddy?" A heavy silence settled over the group. Raziel stiffened, his heart twisting as he caught the pain in the young cub's voice. Kaelen's expression remained neutral as he knelt, bringing Raina closer. "Similar, little one," Kaelen murmured, his tone careful, "but not the same. Here, Raziel." Shift for her. Raziel hesitated only a second before complying. With a deep breath, he let his body morph, bones stretching and shifting until his massive lion form stood before them. A few gasps echoed through the pack at his size, but Raziel barely noticed. He focused on Raina, keeping his posture relaxed and non-threatening. The child clung to Kaelen for a moment, hesitant. Kaelen smiled softly, setting her down. "See, nothing to be scared of," he reassured. Raina's small steps were uncertain at first, but soon enough she circled him, inspecting his mane, tugging on it here and there. Raziel remained still, his lion barely flinching under her tiny hands. When a particularly hard yank made his tail flick in irritation, he caught Soraya's sharp golden stare, and instantly went still. His lion huffed. The former slayer had him completely tamed with a single look. Raina finally took a step back, nodding in approval. "Can stay, Alpha," she declared, before promptly scampering back to Soraya, who scooped her up with a small smile. Raziel exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. His admiration for the small child grew. Her courage to trust a predator, to run into Soraya's arms without fear, was astounding. Then, suddenly, a scent drifted toward him. Soft, fresh like rain. A deep purr vibrated in Raziel's chest as his lion reacted to the intoxicating aroma. "Follow your nose, lion." Darian's voice cut through the haze, knowing amusement lacing his words. "You know what that scent means." Raziel's entire body tensed. His mate. Without hesitation, he turned and strode away from the group, following the scent trail to the barn. As he stepped inside, the scent hit him in full force, nearly overwhelming. His golden eyes locked onto a figure in the shadows. A woman? She was small, delicate, with long grey hair that cascaded around her like a storm cloud. Her sharp eyes shimmered like lightning in a brewing tempest. A deep, uncontrollable roar of pure elation burst from his chest. He circled in place, giddy, his massive tail swishing wildly. He had found her. His mate. The woman tilted her head, studying him with intrigue before stepping forward, her movements fluid as water. "A lion," she mused, her voice soft yet powerful. "And such a beautiful one." She reached for him, wrapped her arms around his thick mane. And Raziel melted. The touch sent pleasant shocks through his body, sealing the bond his soul had longed for. With a deep growl of contentment he shifted, taking her into his human arms. She trembled slightly but didn't pull away. "Raziel," he rumbled, voice thick with emotion. "Juve," she whispered, her breath warm against his chest. A moment passed between them, unbreakable, infinite. Then, from outside the barn, "Well," Alpha Vatrudian's voice rang out, full of laughter, "looks like your friend is staying indefinitely." Kaeren chuckled. "So it would seem." And as Raziel held June in his arms, he knew it was home. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 17. Raziel prowled forward in his lion form, trailing behind his small mate through the dense forest. When they first met, everything had seemed fine, but now he was sure she was avoiding him. Days had passed, and she had turned down every approach he made. His lion grumbled restlessly in his mind, unease settling deep in his bones. What if she was rejecting him? The thought was unbearable. Every day that she remained unclaimed, his yearning for her only intensified. A whole week had gone by. Without Darian around, Raziel couldn't use the vampire's telepathy to communicate with his mate. The frustration gnawed at him, his tail flicking irritably from side to side. The stress built up inside him like a coiled spring, the primal need to claim what was his rising with every passing second. She had every right to refuse him, but the mere idea of rejection was suffocating. If she truly denied their bond, it might just break him. A distressed hiss escaped his fangs at the horrifying thought. His lion rejected the notion outright. "She belongs with us." Then, "Raziel." Her voice cut through his turmoil like a ray of sunlight piercing storm clouds. The second she tangled her fingers in his mane, a deep, guttural sound of pleasure rumbled from his chest. His ears flicked toward her, showing her she had his full attention. "I'm sorry," June murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm probably not what you wanted in a mate. I'm not a shifter. I'm small. I'm broken. I carry a heavy burden from my past, and if it ever catches up to me, you'll be in danger too." Raziel smelled the shift in her scent as her tears began to fall. Her hand in his mane tightened, pulling uncomfortably, but he didn't shake her off. She was hurting, and she needed him. When she finally pulled her hand away, he acted on instinct. Shifting without hesitation, Raziel wrapped his arms around her, lifting her effortlessly off the ground. Her small frame fit perfectly in his grasp, as if she had been carved just for him. The moment of contact sent a shiver down his spine, and he sighed in pure relief. "I couldn't have dreamed of a better mate, little witch," Razmouth rumbled, his voice rough with emotion as he rubbed soothing circles against her lower back. "But—" June tried to protest, but Raziel held her closer, silencing her doubts. "No buts, June," he murmured. He tilted his head, urging her to look up. "Look at the sky. Those clouds. You're doing. You are a powerful weather witch, and I'll be damned if I ever let you go. I've gone through too much to walk away now. I was captured, tortured, starved, and I would endure it all again if it meant I could meet you." A crack of thunder rolled through the sky. June stiffened in his hold, her small hands gripping his face, her grey eyes swirling like storm clouds locked onto his with a fierce intensity. "Who hurt you?" she snarled, her voice nearly as animalistic as his own, as lightning flashed in the distance. Raziel chuckled, touched by the raw anger in her voice. "He's dead, little witch," he assured her, his tone softer now. June searched his face, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then, with a quiet sigh, her grip on his jaw loosened. "If your past ever comes for you," she whispered, "I will protect you. Or at the very least, I'll try." Raziel's breath hitched. "You are beautiful," he rasped, his voice thick with adoration, "and my desire for you is insatiable." Her lips parted, those swirling, storm-colored eyes pulling him in. He leaned forward, his gaze dipping to her lips, stopping just short. His breathing turned shallow, ragged, the hunger in his chest clawing for release. His control was threadbare. Then she closed the distance. A hesitant, shy kiss, soft and uncertain, pressed against his lip. It was everything, and it wasn't enough. His simmering restraint snapped, igniting into a wildfire of need. "I won't be able to stop if we go any further," Raziel groaned, his voice deep and gravelly, pressing her closer against his body. "Then don't," June whispered. And then the world disappeared. Raziel saw nothing but her as he claimed his mate. Darian's hissed words slammed into Kaelin's mind like a warning bell. "Wolves." Kaelen shifted instantly and took off, muscles burning as he ran. He didn't hesitate. Soraya, Thorn, and Isolde flanked him, their pack instinctively falling into formation, ready, prepared to eliminate whatever had dared to threaten their home. Reyna was at school. She wouldn't have to witness this. Lyric was working as well. The cub wouldn't be without one of them if something happened. Kaelen shook the thought away, forcing his mind back to the present. Intruders. A snarl tore from his throat as he pushed harder. When they reached the clearing, Kaelen let his power crash over the area, his presence undeniable. The sight before him was already tense. 3 werewolves stood opposite Darian, their bodies poised to attack, snapping and snarling as the vampire bared his fangs in return. Darian looked deadly, his venom-dripping fangs were fully extended, eyes glowing a vicious red. Kaelen shifted as he approached, striding forward with authority, his gaze locking onto the intruders. 3 wolves. All betters. All greyish in colour. His instincts flared to life. Something was wrong. Then the lead beta shifted, and Kaelen saw it. The eyes. The same eyes as Fergus. The same wolf who had turned him. The monster who had tortured him for 50 years. A feral roar erupted from Kaelen, and he lunged, rage overtaking reason. But Darian was there, a firm hand against his chest, holding him back. "Stay calm, Kaelen," the vampire murmured into his mind. "You'll get to rip them apart soon." Kaelen trembled with the force of restraint, his wolf howling in bloodlust. "I've come to avenge my brother," the beta spat, venom dripping from every word. "Our pack exiled us, now that he no longer rules." "Leave," Kaelen snarled, his voice thick with the promise of death, or die by my hand. His control was hanging by a thread. Only Darian's presence kept him tethered to reason. Not happening, the beta growled, sneering. I kill you, and this pack becomes mine. I will rule it just like my brother did ours. Darian stepped back. He no longer held Kaeren in place. And that was all the permission Kaeren needed. He lunged. The beta barely had time to shift before they crashed, a whirlwind of snapping jaws, ripping claws, and bloodied fur rolling across the ground. The battle was vicious, each second stretching into eternity. And then, silence. Kaeren stood victorious, his blood-streaked muzzle lifting from the lifeless body of Fergus' brother. The corpses of the other wolves lay scattered around him. A triumphant howl burst from his throat, filling the air. Victory. His pack stood strong. He turned, scanning his surroundings. Soraya, unharmed. Therian, alive. Thorn and Isolde, standing tall. They were his family, his pack, and he would never stop protecting them. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting subsequent, interesting daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Epilogue. Soraya exhaled deeply as she relaxed against Kaeren's embrace. The cabin was saturated with the warm, comforting scent of newborn werewolves. Or, to be more precise, half werewolf, half vampire infants. It had been a year since she became part of this pack, and somewhere along the way, Lyric had discovered she was expecting. Soraya let out a quiet chuckle as she recalled the chaos that had erupted when Lyric went into labor. The entire pack had panicked, stumbling over themselves in their desperation to help. Darian, the only one among them with medical expertise, had been an invaluable source of calm, guiding his mate through the process with steady hands and unwavering focus. A small tug on her sleeve pulled Soraya from her thoughts. She looked down, meeting Rhaina's wide, curious eyes, and offered the cub a warm, reassuring smile. The young lynx shifter had come a long way since the devastating loss of her parents. Though the nightmares still haunted her, she was healing little by little, and now she could even remain in the same room as Rhaenys without the need for another pack member's presence. So, Soraya's gaze drifted around the cabin, and her smile widened at the sight of her family. By the crackling fire, Thorn and Isolde lay curled up in their wolf forms, sleeping peacefully, their chests rising and falling in unison. The scent of the newborns had lulled them into a near trance-like state, their instincts soothed by the presence of new life. Isolde in particular seemed more affected. Soraya had caught the telltale scent of pregnancy lingering around her, and she knew it wouldn't be long before the pack welcomed another addition. Across the room, Raziel and June were nestled together in a chair, their bodies entwined in a way that spoke of deep comfort and understanding. The small witch had her legs stretched over Raziel's lap, while the lion shifter massaged her feet with practiced ease. His touch was gentle, reverent, his love for her written in the tender way his thumbs pressed into her arches. On the opposite side of the cavern, Darian and Lyric sat close together, each cradling a newborn in their arms. Twins, a boy and a girl, Silas and Laura. The tiny infants were only a few days old, their scents still fresh and new, filling the air with something primal, something instinctual. "I'm so glad you came for me, Kaeren," Soraya murmured, burrowing further into her mate's chest. "I will always come for you," Kaeren rumbled, his voice thick with devotion. "Nothing in this world could ever keep me from you, my love, my slayer." "We're a pack now, Soraya," Lyric added from across the room, patting Silas's back until a tiny burp escaped. "No one will ever break that." The sound of the baby's hiccup was adorable, and Soraya practically melted on the spot. The nesting scent in the cabin grew thicker, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. A natural defense mechanism, meant to ensure that pups were accepted without question. At least that was what Isolde had explained. She had also warned that, if anyone was foolish enough to attack, they would meet a very unfortunate fate. Soraya inhaled deeply, her keen senses catching the distinct change in Isolde's scent. Pregnant. Her pack was growing, and that thought filled her with an overwhelming, unbridled joy. It hadn't been long since the last remnants of Fergus's pack had come sniffing around, hoping to reclaim what had been lost. The battle had been swift, decisive. Shortly afterward, a letter had arrived, signed by the 4 most powerful alphas in the north. Kaeren had been given official recognition as an alpha in his own right, with the freedom to expand his pack's territory northward if he so desired. Soraya reached up, pressing a lingering kiss to Kaelen's jaw, smiling when his arms instinctively tightened around her waist. She was so grateful to belong to this werewolf. The Slayer Council was no more, disbanded, and with it the cycle of suffering had been broken. No more girls would be forced into a life they never chose. No more young women would be stolen, trained, and conditioned to kill. Soraya had once been a weapon, a tool of destruction, wielded by men who saw her as nothing more than a disposable asset. But now she was free. She had a family, a path, a future. "I love you, my werewolf," Soraya grinned, voice brimming with certainty. "And I love you, my beautiful slayer," Kaeren murmured, capturing her lips in a deep, slow kiss. Soraya sighed into him, melting against his warmth, the reality of her happiness settling into every fiber of her being. He was hers, and she would never let him go. Not again. Not for anyone. Her fate was her own now. A slayer turned werewolf. A woman who had once been cold and unfeeling, now whole, cherished, and deeply loved. She was lucky. As their lips parted, Soraya gazed up at Kaeren, her golden eyes glowing softly in the dim light. And as she rested her forehead against his, a slow, knowing smile curled on her lips. She looked forward to everything the future would bring.